Addictions. We don't like to think of ourselves as addicts, but we're all vulnerable to addictions, and many of us struggle with them every day. The list of significant and common addictions may surprise us. To help us find out more about addictions, we're going to chat to a nutritional neuroscientist, Dr. Delia McCabe. Welcome, Delia. Let's get straight to it. What are addictions?
Any behavior or activity that undermines our physical or mental well-being can be termed an addiction. So anything that we're doing that doesn't support our well-being, let's take coffee for example. It's a very common addiction, even though most people just think it's a normal part of life. But why are people drinking it? Because they don't have enough energy and they need the focus and concentration that caffeine gives them the fake feeling of having. So that's a normal kind of addiction that's really accepted. But then we have serious addictions that we seem to think carry more weight, like gambling, pornography, and unfortunately things like even heroin and marijuana addiction. Those are addictions that all hijack the pleasure transmitter, dopamine, which is also the anticipation neurotransmitter, and make us feel elevated feelings that we wouldn't normally feel in the normal circumstances. So that's basically what addictions are.
So Delia, how do these addictions begin?
Look, some people are just curious. They want to know how something feels, so they try it, and then they get addicted without realizing that was the end point. Some people have a lot of peer pressure, especially young children who don't fit in. They want to make sure that their friends like them, and of course we are creatures of connection. Then of course we have people that have low self-esteem. They gravitate to something to make them feel better. And when families and communities break down, people often gravitate to external sources of pleasure. So there are a number of reasons why this happens. And also we have a society where people model other people's behavior. So just for example, smoking and alcohol and even gambling and pornography, which is now accepted as being something that all young men engage in. These are all activities that once people get engaged in or they start with them, can take a terrible hold on them.
Yes, you mentioned they take a hold on them, and they really can affect people's lives, can't they?
Gary, the challenge is they really hijack the part of the brain that responds to pleasure. And we most know that, dopamine. But the problem that most people don't understand, that dopamine is not just a pleasure neurotransmitter, it's also an anticipation neurotransmitter. So when people are anticipating the pleasure of whatever they're addicted to, dopamine is also released. So it's like a double whammy of dopamine. And people fall into that trap very quickly because of this very, very potent system in the brain that pushes us to do things that give us pleasure.
What are some of the addictions right under our noses that are affecting our children?
Very, very soberingly, technology. When you see a young person completely immersed in a screen, a smartphone or a tablet, you know that that brain is being shaped because the brain is very, very plastic and children have windows of development. You can't rewind these windows. Certain times of a child's life, the brain is focused on certain parts of that brain's development. And if the child isn't being allowed to do what it naturally needs to do during those phases and is instead looking at technology, those parts of the brain don't become developed. And I see this all over, and it really makes me feel very, very sober about the future of those children's brains. Because you see, Gary, what's happening? Those brains are becoming acclimatized to a very, very quick hit of dopamine. And when they get involved in the normal world, just playing naturally, maybe climbing a tree or watching a beautiful sunset or playing with their pet, they do not get the same release of dopamine. So what happens? They crave that release because of the pleasure and anticipation that dopamine comes with. So we are busy rearing a generation of people that are not able to interact with their environment, with their world, with their peers, with their family, because they have to be getting this dopamine hit. So for me, this is one of the most sobering and terrible trajectories I see with children and their developing brain. We cannot rewind this. This is the biggest experiment that we have ever done as a species.
Considering social media and screens, should we be concerned about this?
Gary, it's a huge, huge challenge. It keeps me up at night when I think about the fact that all of these people, these young people, their brains are being shaped by what they're being exposed to. their ideas and their opinions are being shaped by all this information. These are our future leaders. These are people that are not going to be able to think critically because of all this information that they're continuously being bombarded with. What does the future look like? What is our society going to turn into with people who cannot think apart from looking at a screen and getting that dopamine hit? I find it very sobering. As a parent, my children are nearly grown. I look at these young children and I know that their brains are being shaped. We are in deep, deep trouble.
So Delia, what can we do about this?
Gary, from when children are very, very young, we've got to limit them. Limit the exposure that they have to all this technology. We can keep the screens out of their room. When we sit down for a meal, we can make sure that no smartphones are on. They have to be off.
Yes.
If someone has their smartphone on, fine them. Make them feel the pain of using their smartphone when they shouldn't. We need to increase connection as a family, and we need to make sure that as a community we're getting young people out and about a whole lot more. We have to keep in mind that our brains are plastic. Whatever we're exposing them to, they're going to be sucking up. These young brains need to be told this isn't good for them, and limit the time. I spoke to a researcher many years ago who was hired by gaming companies to prove that computer games were good for children's brains, and he walked away from the work when he discovered that it was actually damaging their brains, and he stopped his children from playing computer games, and they were limited to 1 hour a week. So that's a researcher in the field. So that's what we need to do. Just focus on limiting, discussing, and making sure that we keep screens out of our children's rooms.
Delia, you've given us lots of important things to think about today. Thank you so very much. If you would like to know more about addictions, then I'd like to recommend the free gift we have for you today. It's the popular booklet, What Are Addictions and Can We Be Free of Them? Just go to our Incredible Journey website, tij.tv, or scan the QR code on the screen to request your free e-copy now.